hey! When it comes to streaming media, there are two schools of thought. I like streaming sticks because they're cheap and reliable.
Just like me.
I'd rather stick forks in my eyes
The goggles do nothing.
than type with a remote control. I've tried Roku, Fire Stick, and Chromecast, so I've given them all a fair shake. But for most of the past 15 years, I've had an actual PC hooked up to my TV, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Except that currently I don't have a media PC.
And I hate my life.
So today, we're going to fix that. Well, I've been known to take my shirt off for the odd Amazon Fire Stick. I recently bought a 42-inch Roku TV with a remote that is so bad, when you try and turn up the volume, it opens up apps. It's useless garbage. And while I'm making a case for streaming sticks and then bashing Roku, you gotta remember this is built into the TV. Philips, you're on the list. From 2010 to 2020, I had my daily driver desktop in my living room, so it was no big deal to just run an HDMI cable over to my TV. Then my girlfriend moved in, my roommate moved out, my desktop moved into my office. So I built a home theater PC. Then last year, somebody I know was looking for a gaming PC and they made me a very generous offer.
Give me your purse, now!
For the one that was in my living room. So I figured I could use the money, I might as well just sell that thing to them. And that's where I come in. A couple years ago, I rescued a beautiful old Panasonic VCR from a house out in rural Canada that had the floor literally caving in. Talking about a fridge at like a 45-degree angle. Was it like strapped into the wall? I think it had a cement base. It doesn't work, but I figured it was too beautiful to put out to pasture. The VCR, not the floor or the fridge. From the first time I laid eyes on it, I knew this thing would be perfect as my next media PC. My dad gave me a gorgeous 1970s Marantz SR2000 amplifier that's hooked up to my TV right now. If we put a PC inside this VCR body, it will fit the aesthetic of my living room quite naturally. And now, let's get into the science.
The power of science.
Whoa, you doing that without a pocket protector? Meow. All right. Step one was opening up the case to see what kind of space we were working with. We wanted to try and preserve as much of the exterior as possible, including the flap for putting in the tapes and the circuit boards that drive the LCD and
buttons.
We did our best to be careful and avoid cutting wires or breaking plastic, but sometimes this was unavoidable. Once we got everything apart, we were pleasantly surprised. Not only was there a bunch of space inside, but it was divided into two distinct sections. One for the mechanical parts and the heads, and the other for the power supply. I had a Ryzen 5500 on an ITX board that I was hoping to use, but no dice. So after taking a few measurements and doing some dry fitting, we realized we could probably fit a mini ITX board in the main area. Luckily, I also had this i5 4590 on a mini ITX board that
just barely fit.
You might actually remember this system from our cheap Baldur's Gate 3 builds, and a link to that will be at the end of this video. It had been a long time since I'd cut anything with a Dremel, but that was all about to change. Thanks to this project, my lungs are full of plastic fumes and my pants are gritty as and I'm not just talking about from dried urine. Now, when cutting with a Dremel, of course, eye protection is important, but we didn't have anything appropriate here, so I put on this full-faced sunglass mask. However, with the mask on, I found it way too dark. I decided to help Dan with his struggles and raided our dad's sunglasses stash for something with a little less tint.
These Elvis shades fit the bill perfectly.
Now that I was all shook up and ready to die on a toilet, it was time to cut some of the plastic that was preventing us from getting the motherboard all the way down in the case. But once we did, it slotted in beautifully. And it's actually kind of crazy how well this motherboard fit. Like, we didn't even need screws. It was straight up pressure fit. Once we'd mocked everything up, we realized that I/O was probably gonna be a problem. There was no way that we were gonna get proper access to the HDMI port, so using integrated graphics was basically out of the question. I dug through our pile of graphics cards and found this low-profile Nvidia GeForce GT710. It's not super powerful, but realistically, all I needed to do is stream media, so it should be fine. And just for the record, I have a soft spot in my heart for crappy graphics cards, so I was stoked that we were using this. I don't know, I always love it. I'm like,
Let's build an office machine.
look at my sick custom build.
For typing.
Anyway, it has an HDMI port in the exact spot that we need, and it doesn't use a lot of power, which is great because we're trying to keep the power usage and overall thermals down. We thought we'd tuck it into this nice little pocket in the back and then use a riser cable. Ironically, the riser cable was too long and wouldn't fit. So just for fun, we tried popping it right into the PCI Express slot on the motherboard, and it actually fit perfectly. Now that the motherboard section was out of the way, it was time to tackle the power supply. I got up on a ladder to look through our older power supplies since this machine wasn't going to need a lot of wattage. The first potential winner I found was this skinny small form factor power supply, but it was rated at just 210 watts, so I knew we were going to be cutting it close. So we tried this power supply in the case, but when we plugged it in, it was pretty clear that there wasn't going to be enough juice to get this machine's juices flowing. So I took some measurements, and I realized that we could probably fit a full-size ATX power supply in there. I went back up on the ladder and discovered that most of our older power supplies are under 300 watts and old enough to vote. So I went to our box on the floor full of modern power supplies and grabbed the lowest wattage one in there. This beauty, 450 watts of pure ponage. So we mocked it up, figured out that it would fit, but all at the cost of subjecting my lungs to a little more plastic fumes. So I busted out my Elvis glasses and we hit the Dremel like you hit the highway with a clean Corvette. Heavy metal. Shout out Don Felder. One sweet montage later, and our power supply was now fit into the VCR. All we had to do was cut another hole to run a power cable out, but shebang shaboom, thong song. Dan wanted to go home and cough more plastic out of his lungs, so I stuck around to install Windows and make sure that everything worked. Whilst doing this, I realized we had one more issue to solve that we hadn't thought of earlier. Internet connectivity. Even if we could access the Ethernet port, my living room is nowhere near my router, so I need this thing to do Wi-Fi. I found this nice PCI Express wireless adapter, took off the full-size metal plate, and we ran the cables out the back using the same hole as the HDMI adapter. So with Windows installed and everything put back together, it was time to show it off to our friends. And that's when this build went from good to great. Oh God, Homer.
Oh, but you should see a doctor.
Our friend Mr. I Void Warranties wanted to take it to the next level, and he really had some fun with it. His first idea was to hook up the power button from the VCR to the PC, and with a little bit of soldering, it was no problem. He then added two 40mm fans to the back and snipped off some of the extra power supply cables just to get them out of the way. Don't worry, he used electrical tape.
It's called electrical tape because it conducts electricity.
For added convenience, he tucked away some USB ports and 3.5mm jacks under a little flip door on the front of the VCR to make the I/O more accessible. However, that was just the beginning. In our group chat, someone put out the idea that we should cover up the exhaust fans by hollowing out a VHS tape. I loved this idea, so I went and found a cassette no one would miss, Hogan's Heroes, and a very little-known Canadian game show, Test Pattern.
Take a toss. 20 points! Give her 20 points! There. Audience. You got 50 points!
And our buddy went to town cutting it up and putting 2 slot blower fans in it. This thing moves a ton of air and looks great. Then at the end of the day, another idea was brought up that would make this thing even cooler. He wanted to take the media buttons off of a keyboard and wire them up to the VCR's buttons on the front panel. We went through a collection of garbage keyboards and found an old PS2 Microsoft keyboard with play, pause, sleep, volume, internet browser, and email buttons. Unfortunately, it was a membrane keyboard and was going to be a huge hassle to figure out how to wire up. When we got together the next week to work on this, dude came hot out the gate saying he had figured out how to make the membrane keyboard work and wanted to try that first. Using a multimeter, He checked each trace from each button to figure out which combination of traces were lit up from each button press. Before completely reassembling, we tested the buttons, and they worked. So we put it all back together, and they didn't work. Turns out there was one solder joint that didn't survive reassembly, so we took it all apart, fixed the solder joint, and then covered it all in hot glue just to be safe.
If you'd also like to be covered in hot glue, let us know in the comments. I am beyond impressed with how this build turned out. When Stace and I finished it initially, I was very impressed. But after Mr. I Void Warranties got his hands on it, it genuinely became impressive. Sure, it took an extra month of Saturdays to finish, but the final product was worth the extra time.
I agree.
We got to use some old hardware that was just sitting around collecting dust, and I get to pull the forks out of my eyes and use an actual PC with my TV again. The only thing that went wrong in this entire build was one of the times that we had pulled it apart to reassemble it, we accidentally pulled the Wi-Fi antenna cables out of the PCI Express card. But it ended up turning out even better because we salvaged new antenna cables from a broken laptop and tucked them around the inside of the VCR, which makes the build cleaner. It now sits proudly atop my Marantz SR2000 amplifier and beautifully fits my living room's aesthetic. All that's left to do is watch in horror as someone's toddler rips the tape out and destroys the entire cooling system.
If you ever wanted to put something into a PC case, or maybe get yourself covered in hot glue, let us know in the comments. And if you wanted to see what the heart of this VCR PC was doing before this, check out the video we mentioned earlier where we build 3 Baldur's Gate 3 PCs for under $150. Have a good night. I can't stop farting. We can't stop farting.
But I can stop anytime I want to. I just don't want to.